Hi, everyone. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I am Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
You are very welcome, either back or for the first time, to our YouTube channel and our coverage of the Netflix juggernaut Bridgerton.
Whoop.
Today, we are discussing episode 6.
Swish.
Has been controversial since the year of our Lord 2000 when the book was first published, and remains quite controversial. So up front, we want to say a couple quick things about this episode, and then we'll kind of get into the recap. One of the pieces of coverage that this is getting is that a sexual assault happens in this episode. From our perspective, it does not. I am a sexual assault survivor. I have worked with sexual assault survivors for nigh on 20 years. I know many, many survivors who do not believe that this is that at all. I've talked to several people who believe that calling this assault is actually cheapens their experiences. I know other people for whom this was triggering and felt assaulty. Clinically, in the definition, it is difficult to say that this is just because of power and all that kind of stuff that we'll get into. However, that doesn't matter if you feel it was.
Yeah.
If you feel it was, we want to be upfront with you that we don't agree. If you would like to watch this video to understand why we don't agree, you are obviously welcome to. But we don't, in good conscience, want to invite you into listening to our conversation and then pull some sort of 180 on you where you think we're not going to be what we are. If this episode and this act was terrible for you, we are sorry. We are sorry that they didn't take the care that you needed them to take in this art, especially because we don't believe that their intent was to portray an assault at all.
Or to harm people.
At all. And it's we'll get into it. I understand even in the book why Julia Quinn made the choice that she made. I've never loved it, but I've understood dramatically why she did it. But again, 2000 to 2020 is a long ass time in how we talk about bodies and sex.
And consent.
Anyway, just up front, wanted to say that and let you know where we're coming from. We like to be very, very clear. We'll also have links to the American Rape and Incest Sexual Assault Network, RAINN, which is who we trust explicitly, to where if the events of this episode make you feel that you need to speak to somebody, we would ask that you trust professionals to do that. There's lots and lots of people who have walked through this and are open and willing to have a chat. That being said, we'll explain why it doesn't fit that box for us as soon as we talk about Penelope, Colin, and Marina.
Oh Lord, y'all! That is effectively this episode. We bounce back and forth between Cliveden and the happy newlyweds, happy for most of the episode, and all the Colin and Penelope and Marina dramas.
Essentially, Colin, Penelope, and Marina makes me grumpy because it was, to me, plot filler. I never understood it. Ruby Barker as Marina is doing a great job. I just never quite got why we were detouring with her. I loathe in any story where a woman deceives a man about pregnancy. It is one of my personal buttons. I mean, I loathe it.
She really does, y'all. We just read a romance about a
secret baby, and I lost it.
And I got a whole lot of angry WhatsApps about it.
I can't. We all have the things we can't do. I can't do mob AUs, and I can't do secret babies. Not a thing for me. So even if they rewrote the entirety of Bridgerton to where Marina and Colin got together, I probably would still hate this.
Still hate the secret baby plot point.
So it, like, the whole time I was on screen, I was just growling. And then I have been the overlooked fat girl before, so I just wanted to grab Penelope and cuddle her and love her forever. It just was that whole storyline just made me
and I mean, like, I don't really have anything to add to it aside from the of it all. Marina's not nice about it.
She's every reason not to be. You don't have to be nice. it just feels like low-hanging fruit to tell the story of this outsider girl of color being not nice. It just feels like lazy storytelling.
It does. And like, you know, I don't know, maybe I just feel too emotionally connected to Penelope and Nicola Coughlan, who like in real life we would be like best friends. And so maybe that's the combination of the two where I'm like, you're mean to Penelope, I don't have time for you.
But also, like, we have loved Colin and Penelope since before the show was announced.
Yeah,
so that too.
We're coming at it from that perspective, and if you didn't know that about our bias, it's there, and I can't remove it. So I'm not sure if like I hadn't known that, if I hadn't read the books, if I still would find Marina as upsetting. Probably because even if I hadn't read the books, it's still Nicola Coughlan, and she was in Derry Girls, and I can't unsee that either. But yeah, Penelope is constantly saying Colin's a good guy, and she's not, you know, she's not doing this because she wants Colin for herself. Like, that's not the motive.
At least not entirely. I think that's certainly some of it. Let's just
I don't think she thinks Colin is ever going to choose her.
No, but like her unrequited love is a motivator here.
It is, yeah, but
a good guy.
But also it's just he's a good guy, and like if he's not going to be with me, he should not be with somebody who's got a fake secret baby.
Yeah.
And so that becomes one of the problems going through it. And what I knew I had something else that happens that's pretty significant. Penelope starts to snoop around and finds the letters, finds out that her mother faked the last one, tells Marina, and Marina's like, so what?
Yeah.
And then she's really mean to Penelope at the end of that. I believe I know so much more than you, Pen. I'm like, where did this come from? You like
also the trope that women know a ton of things once they've had sex is one I don't get into either.
Yeah.
It can be completely idiotic about the world and have sexual partners in the hundreds, and can be very wise about the world and be virgins. Like this idea that like once you have sex, you're a learned woman of the that trope can die. And again, another piece of this story that I didn't love.
Yeah, and the fact that, you know, she can let Penelope down without, or she can, you know, tell Penelope that it doesn't matter without being mean. And the fact that she chooses to, if I can be the one to break that childish dream for you, like,
you don't need to do that. Like
now you're just, and like, I can rationalize all of it, folks. And I understand that, like, she's in a rough place. She's had her heart broken. She's lashing out.
The system is stacked against her, all of that. But right now it's a woman and a woman, and she chose the cruel route.
Yeah. And like, you know, she's desperate. She's petrified. Colin's not going to agree. Like all of those I understand, but I still didn't like it. That's the Penelope of it all. To wrap up that storyline, we get the reunion of Pen Louise, and she goes to her best friend and cries, as always happens with the heartbreak. And we get Whistle Down revealing Marina's secret in the papes. Headlines sell papes, folks.
Yeah.
Newsy sell papes. But
Newsy sell papes, headlines help.
Headlines really help. And the headline that Marina Thompson has a secret baby is a pretty big headline. But it also has real negative ramifications for our Penelope, which isn't so great, and her sisters. But she felt that that's what she had to do. So that's the end of that one. And now we can do the Simon and Daphne, the Diamond and Saphne of it all.
So once Diamond and Saphne figure out that they like sex together, they have a lot of it.
They have it everywhere.
They have it everywhere. There's a particularly, for those of us who are into Beast's Library from the 92 cartoon, there's a particularly fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, if you've always wanted to do
library,
yeah.
I felt like a major shout out to like every older millennial girl. Like,
who wanted
building that library.
Yeah, who saw themselves as Belle and you know fantasized about having sex in that library, man.
The library. I still believe that if Disney World ever actually built the library with the ladders, it would be one of the more popular rides.
Oh.
I would stand in line to ride a ladder.
I would pay like extra money to like fling myself across that ladder
while I could sing "I Want Adventure." Anyway, so feelings about books.
Library sex scenes.
They obviously know how to make each other happy. Simon, as another major trope in romance novel sex scenes, the woman comes first or they come together. The camera is very, very clear to focus on Daphne's face. We are aware that as he is teaching her these different ways to have sex, he is making sure she is enjoying herself.
Yeah.
Which is also in Romancelandia, one of the ways that is coded that Simon is fundamentally a good man. Yeah. So because that reformed rakes make the best husbands because reformed rakes are good men who were bored.
Yes, and they rake around a lot. And so they know their way around women's bodies and they know how to give them pleasure.
Because STDs do not exist in these fantasy. They just don't. They don't exist in fantasy.
It never happens.
So, or they only happen to evil characters and mean girls. So, there's a lot of tropes around sex and how sex works. I would imagine that in 20, 30 years, when people are teaching TV studies, this episode will be talked quite a lot about how women were portrayed, particularly Daphne, how Daphne's body was portrayed. There will be a whole lot of talk about how much we saw naked men before we saw naked women. Like in terms of film studies, this, if you contrast episode 1 to this episode, it's stark.
Yeah.
In who we focus on and all that kind of stuff. It's great. And then we're gonna get to 2 key scenes.
Before we get there though, I just want to like throw in, because I was looking at my notes, one of the other subplots of this with Daphne is that she is not super great at being Duchess right away.
Oh no, she's terrible, bless her.
And so
this is the village fair.
Yeah, fits and starts.
I forgot about the fair. Okay.
Yeah, fits and starts for our Daphne. You know, Violet taught her a lot, but she bumps heads with Mrs. Coulson, who's in charge of the Cliveden estate, on several things. She missteps at the village fair when she doesn't understand that, you know, the pig that wins the competition gets sent, whatever, they win a contract. And there's a delightfully ginger, very, very pregnant lady who I don't think we get named, who helps her kind of understand. And she feels all this pressure to live up to the title of a duchess, to live up to Simon's mother, who Mrs. Coulson tells her was the perfect duchess. We get a couple of sad scenes with Daphne and the nursery, and kind of closing that door, literally and figuratively. But that's also a big romance trope, is like, you know, a woman fumbling through a status and being nervous about it. A lot of times in romance, you get like, you know, a woman falling in love with a duke who's not titled, and she has to like learn how to.
Or even if she was a countess, she wasn't a duchess. Yeah. And so like the difference is there. Learning how to be a duchess is a trope, because Romancelandia has as many dukes as Game of Thrones has dragons, actually even more. So it's
God, they just make up so many
all over the place. There are maybe 10 in real life. We have at least 1,900.
I was about to say, I'm just looking now at all the books I have on my shelf and how many of them mention Duke in the title.
So many. For a long time, that was all that was getting published. So
anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we recognize that.
Good idea.
That is a part of Daphne's progression as well in the book and in the show. And speaking of Daphne's progression.
So she has tea with Mrs. Coulson because she realizes that she has to get to know Mrs. Coulson to do this job. Yeah. In order to be the Duchess, she has to know the housekeeper. And Mrs. Coulson turns out loves a gossip. Girl loves the goss.
Spilled some tea.
As soon as she could figure out that Daphne was safe, she was like, okay, here we go.
And that Daphne cared about Simon as well. As soon as she revealed that, Mrs. Coulson was like, we're on the same team.
We're on the same team because, oh, good, you're not going to be his dad. Fantastic.
Love it.
And this is where Daphne figures out that the stuff that Simon's been spilling onto the sheets in order to make a baby needs to stay inside of her.
And she goes to her maid, her lady's maid, and is like, explicitly, tell me how babies are made.
And did you know this? And all this kind of stuff. I also love her lady's maid, by the way. Like, I love their dynamic.
Yeah, she's great. She is really like an unsung character in this.
In my fan fiction, she gets her own story. Like, I'll write it.
Just write
I can totally write. And I mean, there's lots of Bridgerton fan fiction already. Don't worry. Yeah. But I think that might be one that I write. That would be fun.
That would be a fun one to write. Ooh, keep me posted. I want to know who she falls in love with. Yeah. So that sets us up for the big old confrontation. And we'll talk about the difference between.
So in the book, let's just throw this out there. In the book, when they have this scene where she forces him to finish inside of her, Simon's a little bit drunk. So she kind of gets him a little bit drunk.
Doesn't he come home drunk or something?
Oh, I thought she gave him a lot of wine at dinner.
I think they've already had a fight at this stage, and like they're separated, and he comes home really drunk.
Okay.
And she like goes in to see him, and he's like, I missed you and whatever. And then
that's possible. I could be mixing it up with another novel. Anyway.
It happens, like, as we said in episode 5, misunderstandings and breakups happen all the time in romance. So forgive us for getting confused. Either way, in the book, he's drunk. And that's a big part of why people have had trouble with this scene since it was published. Oh yeah. In the book, it's much more murky.
Dubious consent. Now I should say too, in terms of the history of romance, dubious consent is actually a feature, not a bug. So from the 80s and 90s, rewind. So when Bridgerton was published in 2000, a real shift was happening in romance publishing between what a lot of people know as the bodice rippers, and that were a lot about rape fantasy, to be completely honest. There was a lot of the stereotypes that people have about romance are actually books that were published from like 85 to 2002-ish. Like, a lot of those books don't exist anymore, or they are labeled very explicitly as rape fantasies. Rape fantasy is very popular. For those of you who are uncomfortable with it, I'm sorry to tell you, it is a very popular fantasy among fantasy consumers. It is something that happens. There was quite a lot of stories around dubious consent, because a rape fantasy is that, by the way. So there is non-consent at all. But consensual non-consent is what is a rape fantasy. We also just call that dubious consent. There's some differences. Don't at me. I'm doing broad strokes here. But what happened in the Duke and I is dubious consent, because he does not explicitly in the book at all agree to what is happening.
Yes.
And you can make arguments that he was not in a position to agree with what is happening.
Because of his level of intoxication. Correct. In the show,
he is sober as a judge.
He is, and he comes to collect Daphne for evening sex. And she has...
I'd like to like, that sounds like a decent schedule.
Well, Reg J. John Page can collect me for evening sex anytime.
At his leisure.
And, you know, so it's very consensual at the start. Mm. She surprises him by deciding she's going to be on top this time. And
which he is super into.
Super excited about the ride she's about to take.
Until
she like he starts to, and like I've watched this episode 3 times.
Yep, me too. And this scene probably 3 more. Just this scene. So
he never, like, and I don't want to sound like I'm justifying things. It's very complicated, as we've said. Factually, he never says stop. He says Daphne a couple of times. He might have said wait, but it's unclear.
There are some subtitle countries where he says wait and others that he doesn't.
Interesting. Interesting.
Because I know people in, I think, the UK who saw him say wait, and I did not.
I'll have to watch it back with subtitles and see what US Netflix has done. He does look worried.
He looks panicked. I'll even give them that.
He does look a bit panicked, and he comes inside her.
And then loses his mind.
He stammers, "What did you do?" And
however,
she's very upset. One of the things I noticed from my notes, and I forgot, before you get to your point, 2 seconds. He says to her, "I thought you understood how a child came to be." And that, as we discussed in episode 5 coverage, is a departure from the book.
And also kind of not relevant in this at this juncture.
Yeah, not the best look for you to say, Simon. But that's one of the things I didn't like about how they did it in the show was, in the book, he knows that he's lied to her. And he knows that he's intentionally misinformed her. Also just in the show, Simon, no, she knows nothing. You've taught her everything. You know this. Don't play this angle.
Or if you had or this is something we double check.
Yeah.
This is something that we say, hey, by the way, it's not that I physically can't. I have no idea if I physically can't because I pulled out in all my sexually active years. You clarify what can and won't mean.
Yeah.
Clarify what can and won't mean. And if you clarified what can and won't mean, you don't get in this situation.
Use your words. But also, we talked about this in romance. They don't use their words.
They never use their words. And even when they use their words, there's misunderstandings because that's how this works.
Yes.
True statement. If the sexes were reversed in this, we would have a lot more trouble with it. But the reason that argument to me doesn't fly is that this is not a gender equitable society. Flipping genitalia doesn't do anything. And that's all that would happen if we said, well, if the guys force the woman. Men have all the power in this society. They have all of it. Daphne's only power will be as a mother.
Mm-hmm.
He has all the power to make her a mother or not make her a mother. You should also remember that if women couldn't get pregnant, it was their fault. Yes. There was no conversation about fertility beyond the fact that men were all virile and wonderful and women had varying degrees of wombs.
I was about to say, good wombs or bad wombs?
Good wombs or bad wombs?
Working wombs or broken ones?
If you ate the wrong foods, if you weren't on bed rest long enough, I mean, my God, read historical pregnancy journals and just be incredibly thankful for OBGYNs. So...
yeah, there's that scene with Nigel Burbrooke's mom where she's like kippers on toast or something. Like,
miss me with that.
The things that people thought they needed to eat or do to get pregnant or whatever.
And then, I mean, we have Marina with the tea at one point in this whole thing.
Oh, yeah. The herbal concoction.
So I don't buy that the idea of a gender swap as offensive is a justification as to why this scene is ugly, because gender swapping it is not possible because of the contexts of gender in this situation to prove the point that they want to prove. Again, if this feels like assault to you, muzzle, amazing. It doesn't to us for these reasons.
Yeah. Also it's like, we've talked about this several times, but I think the physicality of the position.
Yeah, I was about to transition into that. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about this, and Simon is he's taller, he's stronger than Daphne. She's a slip of a thing, and that he could not have pushed her off.
My husband brought this up actually, and hit my husband is very clear spoken and does not beat around bushes. And he watched the scene, he looked at me and he goes, A, he knew he was coming before that. B, he had time to get her off of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or he wanted, my husband has no time for men in books that are so overcome by their physicality that there's no excuses made. So to him, to say that this is Daphne's fault is letting Simon way off the hook for the responsibility that Simon has over Simon's body.
Mm-hmm.
And that if he didn't want it to happen, there were ways that it didn't happen. my husband was like, so he could have smacked her. He could have pulled, like, he could have like thrown her across the bed. Like, he could have done any one of those things. And so the idea that the onus is entirely on Daphne in this, to him, he would want us to say, as a male person, he finds offensive.
Yeah, because like, he could have even tried screaming, no, I don't want.
No. Could have said no.
Stop.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this. Get off me.
And according to men I've spoken to, they would have had time to do that. So there's all this, is it dubious consent? Sure, possibly. Is it not great? 100%. Do they both make massive mistakes? Yes. Is it a good look for Daphne? Absolutely not.
It's super manipulative.
It's super manipulative. Is lying about children a good look for Simon? It is not. It is super manipulative.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, they're both ugly here. And so to say that, to me, assault means that only one person is ugly.
Yeah.
Because if you call this assault, to me, it's victim blaming either way, in a little bit of a way. Again,
everything's a spectrum.
Everything's a spectrum. But what it reads to me as, it has to just remain a really shitty thing two married people did to each other.
Yeah.
And it is. There's no way around that. And the show doesn't want us to get around that. I deeply appreciate that he was sober. I think they did as much as they could. You can't yeet this plot line or this scene out of the story. You can't. We talked about it for months before this premiered.
Yeah.
This needs to happen, unless they were going to take this incredibly crucial part out of Simon's character, which they were never going to do. So by episode 2, I knew this scene was going to happen. I think this is the best they could have done.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like, it becomes, I think if you focus so much on the question of whether it is or it isn't assault, it takes a lot of the power, emotional power, out of this idea of betrayal. And like, I'm just looking at my notes and I said, like, can Daphne's ends justify her means, and can Simon's ends justify his means?
Yeah, and in the reviews I've read where people ask those two questions, they only ever ask Daphne's.
Yeah.
Which feels like a bizarre internalized misogyny for this. Like, why is no one mad at Simon? Like, is it because we want to let wounded men be wounded and we can't let angry women be angry? Like, why are we pro Simon all of a sudden in this?
That sounds like some real deep internalized misogyny, and the fact that we don't like women to be angry. Yeah, because, like, y'all, he knew she was ignorant. He knew he was getting away with some parsing of language by saying, I won't have children, or I can't have children. And Daphne's right to call him out on it. Those are two different words. Very two different. And the other thing that I liked about my notes that I wrote down that I want to share with you is that he only ever gave her the parts of himself that he wanted to. And he thought that that was enough. And Daphne thought he gave her his whole self, like she gave him.
Yep.
And that is a real emotional betrayal, everybody. She thought she gave everything to this man, that they were on the same page in this marriage finally. And she found out that he's only ever given her what he wanted to. That's a big deal.
And in the book, this happens about halfway through.
Yeah.
And so to go from here is a real fast forward.
Woo.
In the next 2 episodes, you'll hear us say we don't think they spent enough time with this. There's huge pieces missing of their reconciliation.
And their separation. They're separated in the book for like, I think 6 weeks.
6 weeks. It's a hot minute because Lady Whistledown starts talking about it, and Anthony is like,
yeah, Simon leaves in the book. Simon leaves Daphne at Cliveden, and Daphne eventually goes back to London by herself.
Yeah,
and is there for weeks before Simon shows up.
Yeah. And that doesn't happen in this, obviously. There's also a very significant plot line with his stammer that we will get into in the next episode, because we've talked about Simon enough today. So we'll get into it in the next episode, but as a difference in how they wrap up things.
Yeah.
And again, they chose to do a bunch of different storylines, especially the Marina, Penelope, Colin storyline. And and not kind of give us as much time as possible with Simon and Daphne. And so we'll fill that in for some of y'all as we go forward.
Mm-hmm.
This episode hurts, and it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm. Relationships are messy. People hurt people. Hurt
people. And one of the things that we both love about romance is that hurt people, but they find their happily ever afters. And it shows flawed and passionate humans figuring out how to do life together in a way that very few other genres do. And so don't worry, all the other Bridgerton books have messes of this proportion on some level, in terms of not communicating clearly in some way. So I think that's it. That's all I've got for today. My rage has burned out, I think.
Yeah, it's a really complicated situation, and it's one of those things that when the conversations happen on Twitter and Instagram, it's hard for us to nuance those. So we both felt very strongly that we wanted to be real intentional about this discussion and give it a lot of space, because it's real easy to have a hot take on Twitter about something that's very, very complicated, especially when we take our lens and understanding of consent and assault from 2020 and apply it to 1813. And there are times that rape is always rape. There are times that assault is always assault, regardless of the lens. But this one is very, very muddled. And so we hope if you stuck with us, you enjoyed this conversation, or you learned from it, or gained a new perspective. And we will see y'all for episode 7.